Plan Update Technical Advisory Committee meeting number 4. As you just heard, we will be recording this meeting and it will be posted to the Port's website. Let's do that. So we'll start off with some introductions. With the Port staff, we have Rudy Rudolph, the Director of Operations and the Airport Director with us today. I'm not sure, is Lisa on? I don't think I see Lisa.
Not at this time.
Okay. And then Jenny, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Jenny Foley-Jones, Senior Manager of Communications, Marketing, and Government Affairs for the Port.
Thank you. And from the project team today, we have myself, I'm the project manager, Leah Whitfield. We also have Justin Hyde, our lead planner for the study, Renee Dowlin, our environmental planner, and Darren Murata, our lead engineer from our subconsultant Dow as well. So again, we are recording this presentation and it will be posted to the Port's Airport Master Plan Update website. We will be muting all of the participants throughout the presentation. However, when we get to the preferred alternative section, the TAC members, we'd really like to have a discussion at that point. So if you all want to just use the raise your hand function in Zoom, then, or you can also put a comment or question in the chat box, we'll monitor that as well. But feel free to just raise your hand and speak up at that point. And then again, use the chat box if you have a comment or a question. Since this is a technical advisory committee meeting, we won't be taking public comments and questions, but if the public is attending, you're welcome to put anything in the chat box, questions or comments, and we'll be happy to answer those in an updated Q&A for the website later on. So this is our 4th and final technical advisory committee meeting. So thank you to each of the technical advisory committee members that have been in attendance, especially those that have made all 4 meetings. We appreciate your time. So today's agenda is really going to focus on preferred alternatives, but we'll give you an overall project progress update, talk about the preferred alternative goals, and then we'll dive into what that draft preferred alternative looks like and have an opportunity to discuss and get feedback from you before we finalize that document, and then touch on emerging technologies and then next steps on where the master plan kind of goes from here after your responsibility as a TAC member has been completed.
So we just want to be able to kind of run down where we have been and what we've done so far. So our project progress can show that we've completed the inventory section along with the forecast, which has been approved by the FAA. And from that, we were able to dive into the facility requirements to figure out what is actually needed and then developed 3 alternative concepts that you were able to see last time. So our current focus is going to be on coordinating with the HCP, fleshing out the preferred alternative concept, and then eventually that will flow into the airport layout plan. And in the future, we're going to be looking at the implementation of what we've been able to come up with for the preferred alternative and how that'll come about, as well as the Part 139 commercial service feasibility study. So when we look at the airport and the port's property out here, it's a very large area. So we're not going to be necessarily looking at the new market area, but more what the airport is from what the FAA is really focusing on. And that's what's in those red lines. And when we look at the airport layout plan that was previously generated in the last master plan, we can see that the red lines around that are what is shown in the master plan. So we're going off of that same criteria and kind of that same area. So it's not the full span of the port's development options and area there. We're just focusing in on the airfield. So with that, we set up the goals for the preferred alternative and the things that we're looking at. And we want to make sure that it's known that the master plan is an unconstrained planning document. And so we developed 3 alternatives, and of those 3 alternatives, ideas from each have flown into the preferred alternative concept that we've come up with. And that concept is really hitting on meeting the design standards for the FAA and the future-based and transient aircrafts at the airport. Along with maintaining the crosswind runway for smaller aircraft. The crosswind runway is a eligible item with the FAA. And so that's a heavy burden on the port. And so we want to make sure we're having the right amount of pavement out there that's going to be needed. And we want to be able to look at the future development, include emerging technologies, and continue the airport towards self-sustainability and self-sufficiency in the long run. And that's what the preferred alternative is going for as we go into it. And Darren's going to lead us through that preferred alternative concept.
Thanks, Justin. So this is the draft preferred alternative that we've developed based on some of the development alternatives that we've gone through in previous meetings. So just as a refresher, what you see here in blue color, that represents the existing taxiway pavement that is proposed to remain. And then in this red color is taxiway pavement that is new, that is proposed. So the next slide, I'm going to kind of go through the changes one by one. So the first thing here is you see is some of the taxiway connector intersections would be realigned. And this is a FAA standards issue. We would get them realigned so that they intersect the runway at 90 degrees. You also see removal of taxiway connectors from the middle third of the runway. This is another FAA standards issue. We really try to avoid having taxiway connectors intersect within the middle third. Next, realignment of taxiway F. And moving on, next is a realignment of taxiway W. And finally, the crosswind runway in this preferred alternative would actually be shortened by almost 650 feet there. Also show here an expansion of the fuel farm. And I guess I'll pause for a second in case anyone has any questions about the taxiway system itself. And then next we'll talk about how this affects what the development areas look like. So feel free to jump in if you have a question or a comment. It's like Richard's got his hand up.
Yes, I just want to make sure on the shortening of runway 826 that it still physically connects to runway 1735, correct? You could have an express taxi from one to the other.
Yeah, it would still cross runway 1735 and the new end on the west side. Oh. I just lost the screen.
Sorry, Darren, I think Leah was fixing the view so that it was easier for people to see.
Oh, okay, great. The new end on the west side would be right at the intersection with the new taxiway Whiskey.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was fixing the tech issues. I'm not sure if you mentioned or not, Darren, that, you know, in our draft alternatives or the 3 alternative concepts we looked at, alternative 1 and 3 left the crosswind runway at its existing length, and alternative 2 shortened it to the other side of 1735, to just to the east side to get the runway safety area outside of the runway. And so this is kind of a new look at that. So it's a little bit of a compromise between the different alternatives that we looked at.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, we thought this made sense based on where we're proposing locating taxiway Whiskey, just having it match up, having the end of the runway match up with taxiway Whiskey. Other comments on the proposed taxiway system alternative? No. Well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, which shows some of the development areas. So as you can see here, the layout of the taxiway system really does have an impact on what development can occur outside of that. So this just shows a mix of the different land uses based on this taxiway system layout. So really a mix of aviation industrial areas shown in blue, mixed with various types of general aviation areas shown in the pinkish color, as well as commercial air service there on the west side of the airport. And the total development areas there shown in the table of just over 440 acres. I guess at this time, I'll take any questions or comments on the land use areas that we're showing here.
I think Katrina has her hand up.
Hi,
Hi,
Katrina.
I'm just wondering, how do these land totals compare to what is on the ground today and their uses?
As far as, do you mean like existing
Yes,
areas today?
yes.
So, well, a lot of these areas right now are currently undeveloped. So I don't have an exact number for you, but a lot of these redevelopment areas would be essentially new development.
Yeah, this is Rudy, and I think I can address your question. This is really consistent when you look at the land use areas identified, fairly consistent with the existing master plan as it is today. We'll have an actual final total once we get into the land use numbers a little bit later as to what it compares to under this one compared to what the actual existing airport master plan is. But I anticipate that the total numbers are going to be pretty close to the same amount, and you may see some small changes between the type of land use, whether the GA small gets a little bit greater and the aviation related industrial may get a little bit smaller. So those numbers may flex a little bit, and we'll have that a little bit further on after today.
Thank you.
And I will mention, just between the existing approved airport layout plan from the FAA, so the aviation industrial on the existing ALP is 195.5 acres. GA small and GA corporate are a little flip-flop. So GA small was only 12.5 acres and GA corporate was 160 acres. And then commercial air service was 30 acres and commercial was 1.3 acres. But so overall, a total difference of less than 40 acres being identified.
Looks like Max has also got his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, just back to the taxiway realignment for just a second, but on Echo on the west side of 2-6, is there any thought of putting a run-up area at the end of that one?
Right in here.
Yeah.
So we haven't talked about it, but I mean, we already have some existing pavement there that we're trying to correct with the standard 90-degree turn. So I don't think it would be difficult to do. Rudy, any thoughts? It's not something we've looked at.
Yeah, it hasn't really been identified as a need at this point, but we can certainly take a look at it.
Yeah, just a thought. I was looking at that. And that one's kind of tight right now, where you kind of just have to do your run up on the taxiway and then jump on 2-6.
Thanks, Max.
Max, any thoughts on the new runway length? I know you use the crosswind as a pilot.
Yeah, I think I'm happy that the plan, the preferred alternative is wanting to keep that much of it. You know, that's works for probably 90% of the users of that particular runway. And I'm also happy that it still connects with 1735 too. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased that that's staying at a pretty good sized length.
Okay,
Great.
great. Any other questions or comments on the draft land use? Okay, I don't think we hear any. All right, we'll continue on and then happy to take more questions or comments at the end as well. So we'll let Renee talk about emerging technologies.
Thanks. Justin mentioned earlier, one of the goals about the master plan was have a discussion about emerging technologies. And, you know, the master plan is a 20-year look, so we need to go through this. So I wanted to touch on three emerging technologies: sustainable aviation fuels, electric aircraft, and hydrogen aircraft. Sustainable aviation fuels is actually not so emerging. It's emerged, I guess, if you will. It's been around for a number of years and getting quite accepted. And it's an industry supported. The FAA is on board. It's creating feedstock, and there's a number of different kinds of feedstock to make fuel, to generate fuel that really typically has a lower CO2 emissions. And that is then blended with Jet A. Up to 50%, the FAA says you can do up to 50% blended. It is basically the materials from waste product. It can be from biomass, animal fats. There's really a variety of things. The beauty about this sustainable aviation fuels is it's a drop-in technology. And what I mean by that is you don't need to have any other existing, you don't need a separate system where they go together. You're just dropping it into the Jet A tanks, and you're able to just proven technology and move forward. In terms of the forecast, there's currently about 27 million gallons that are being used in the United States and around, and they're hoping that it will go up to 3 billion by 2030. So you can see there's a lot of people who are really interested in sustainable aviation fuels. One example, United's actually since 2016, I think, been purchasing 10 million gallons a year and putting it at LAX and putting it into the Jet A tanks. And so while United's getting actually the credit for doing that, probably any plane that's taking off with Jet A from LAX is actually using some version of this. It's actually a 30 to 70 split at this point. So that's interesting. Next one, electric. So we have sustainable aviation fuels. It's been around for a while, getting more and more accepted. Well, there's a lot of discussion and a lot of interest in electric aircraft. And that's been, I have to move, I'm sorry, I have to, my screen's being covered by people. There we go. The electric aircraft is projected to help the aviation industry to reduce, again, their emission goals. It's also projected perhaps to have a lower operating cost. And it's going to work really well with commuters from the 9 to 50 seats, and probably not as much or for a larger aircraft and for smaller flights segments. It's interesting because I think, you know, the main thing is to figure out some areas are going to be around other electric. It's all about your grid, what's your existing infrastructure that you have nearby and in the area, and then trying to figure out how to get that onto the airport. And then there's a variety of ways to be able to do that. I think we have a next slide here as well, sorry. Yeah, there's again, there's been a recent report from the Airport Cooperative Research Program that's actually talked about the charger and the installation costs, and they've ranged from 200 to 250,000 per charger. I know that there's been conversations, a study team with Puget Sound Energy for what kind of grid infrastructure and upgrades that are needed, not just for Olympia, just for the whole region. And then perhaps there's a more economical way to charge with maybe having 2 smaller charges as opposed to 1. And I think you'll also remember from, I think, the last TAC, we talked about smart hangars where there was solar on top of the hangars, and that would also help to either regenerate some of the battery packs or different things. So again, a lot of things are happening in the electric aircraft world too, so we're very excited. And the last thing I'd say is sort of in order is hydrogen aircraft. certainly a lot of work going on now. Not as far along as the other two. Probably what I think the most efficient use of hydrogen will be actually making liquid hydrogen, but from electricity. So there's a lot, or solar. So there's a lot of things, wind or solar. And then you begin to wonder, where are you going to place these wind and solar things that are going to make the liquid hydrogen? You'd have to have, there's two things that happen for a hydrogen aircraft, is that you have to figure out from the perspective of the aircraft, what changes need to be made, because it's not just a conventional airplane at that point. And also what kind of changes in the fuel. Again, you're talking about separate systems versus the sustainable aviation fuel that you just drop in and play. This, you're going to have separate systems. Is it just a small truck? Is it separate tanks? Is it, that sort of thing. So again, 20-year master plan, definitely moving forward. Will it happen in Olympia? At some point, maybe the next master plan, but really it's a good thing to keep, we're paying attention to it. There's a lot of people excited about it. And I think there's a lot of emerging technologies that are going to make a difference with our emissions. With that, I'll answer any questions that you have.
I don't see any hands up.
Okay.
And I somehow lost my chat. Oh, there's the chat box. I don't see anything in the chat box either. Okay.
Just one quick.
Access.
Yeah, no problem. We're actually just starting. WashDOT got a grant from our research library internal to WashDOT, and we are actually taking a look and going to have a study together by the end of this year. Looking at kind of a little deeper dive into some of the electrical infrastructure needs for electric aviation. So that should be somewhat beneficial to this, but we're kicking that off this month, hopefully, and should have something by the end of October. So
That's great. That's exciting. So hopefully we'll keep in touch on that. That's great.
yeah, absolutely. And happy to kind of feed anything that we get out of that to you all.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Max. Well, I guess so. We've kind of talked about where we've been over the past 12 months now in the master plan since it kicked off last March. And we're kind of in that last push. We're finishing up the solutions phase over the next month or two. So we presented to you today the draft preferred alternative. And we do have some more work to do when it comes, once we have the airfield set up, just looking at the land use around the airport and how we kind of divvy up the GA small, GA corporate, commercial and aviation industrial land. But once we have that set, we're going to be doing an environmental review. This is a high level review that Renee and our team will do, very similar to what we did in an inventory chapter of the master plan. So we'll look at all of the different categories for environmental against the preferred alternative. And then of course, after the master plan process, before anything moves forward, it has to be work with the HCP and be compatible there, and then the NEPA process as well. But we're hoping to kind of complete the solutions phase in the next month and then start as we get into May into the implementation phase. So that's where we'll start to look at how do we phase the preferred alternative. This is not going to happen overnight. So at what point do we need to rehab maybe the existing taxiway whiskey? And so how do we phase that new relocation of whiskey into the airport's capital improvement program? So we'll be doing cost estimates and looking at all of the different phasing, and then also really diving into funding of how do we fund these projects. There are a lot of there's a lot of new money out there with the latest infrastructure bill from the federal government. So how can we tap into that money over the next 5 years while those funds are available? And then also what other infrastructure grants are out there, such as the VAIL program or other things with some of that emerging aviation technologies. So we'll look at that and the funding and come up with a funding plan with our CIP. And then all of this kind of gets wrapped into that airport layout plan, that map set that the FAA will have to formally approve, and then a draft and a final report as well. So kind of finishing up the solutions, moving towards implementation in the next month or so. We will be hosting another public open house in May. That's kind of our tentative timeline. We've not set a date, but we'll be sure to share that with the TAC members as that date gets closer. So at this point, if there's any other questions or comments from the TAC, feel free to raise your hand, or if we're not talking over top of each other, feel free to just speak up. This could be a record of a TAC meeting. And then just double check, is there anything in the chat box? For some reason, I keep losing the chat box. Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you for your few minutes this afternoon. We appreciate it. My contact information is up on the screen, as well as the master plan update email address as well. If you think of any questions or comments as we move forward. Again, we'll just kind of be taking that draft preferred alternative that we talked today. We'll discuss with Rudy the run-up pad idea and see if we think that that's something that would be useful and would fit in with the preferred alternative. And then we'll be diving into the land use a little more in detail. I greatly appreciate everyone's commitment to the TAC. I know 4 meetings was a lot, and it wasn't as much fun since we didn't get to meet in person, but we greatly appreciate all of your input and hope that you'll have a chance to review the draft chapters, as well as when those are posted on the website, and give us any feedback there also. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.